Now we'd like to go to our keynotes from this morning. David, Louise, and Joyce. If you guys would like to ask a question to the group or an individual panelist, we'll go from there, and then we'll go into the large audience. So, by process of random selection, Joyce.
Thank you. Well, as each of you spoke, and I enjoyed each of your presentations, it occurred to me that I had been speaking with David Down earlier, and he was talking about the fact that the city is trying to put in place a charter for the city. An excellent idea. There are not many cities in Canada that actually have charters that allow them to be more autonomous and put the kind of policy in place that David was showing up on the screen, and would give it a lot more teeth. I just really like to open up the question to all three of you to comment on the charter and what it would mean to, for instance, Bev, you taking forward a lot of the recommendations you were making around walkability. David, you talking about how you might see this helping you to really advance what you were showing us in terms of the municipal plan. And Doug, really, how could it, what your advice might be to the city in putting a charter together and facilitating the kind of development you're talking about for developers?
Okay. A charter would be a fantastic idea in breaking down some of those barriers, I think, that both Doug and Dave were talking about, that we've had individual departments having their own guidelines, their own policies that haven't really served us well. So something that's performance-based rather than regulation-based is a lot more positive. I mean, we sometimes forget that these regulations aren't things that were handed down to Moses, written on tablets. They can be changed. They're made by humans, and our values have changed, and they really need to accommodate where we're going. So if a charter can start to further that, I think that would be a positive thing.
Doug?
I'm going to be the devil's advocate, having lived in Vancouver and other cities and seeing the fragmentation in British Columbia. I don't think Calgary is big enough for a charter yet. I know in my former life in the public sector that Alberta municipalities were given natural people powers in 1995. It gives a huge power, and those powers have not been fully exercised. So some frustrations for our industry. For example, in British Columbia, you can build 6-story wood frame. I fail to understand why that's not being allowed in Alberta and in Calgary. I don't know. I don't know that a civic charter is going to help it. And as we've seen by the rise of Rob Ford and others in Toronto, is giving more power to local government necessarily a good idea. I think that checks and balances are needed.
David.
I am certainly not the expert in the overall impacts of the charter, and that discussion is being held in Alberta at the highest political levels in Edmonton. We don't know what the outcome will be. Certainly, some of the freedoms that we see in a city like Vancouver are attractive to us, and we look at Vancouver's ability to require a certain level of sustainability or require a certain level of affordable housing. And we don't have those freedoms in our Municipal Government Act to allow us to do that. So we have to find other ways, incentives, density bonusing to do that. I think if a charter or some kind of hybrid agreement, cities agreement, could allow us some of those civic opportunities to occur, then that would be a good thing. Can't argue with the Rob Ford issue.
Louise?
Very simple question and quite obvious given my talk. How do you make sure in all these projects that the voice of the people and those who are talking for the people, except you, of course, are heard and taken into account in all those projects?
I'll start. The City of Calgary has a very progressive engage policy, which is spectrum based on the International Association of Public Practitioners, goes from sort of informed to full collaboration. And I think it's a good system. They select what's the appropriate point in that spectrum for each project. Could we do better? Yeah, absolutely. I think that group is understaffed. I'd like to see more rigor, and I'd like to see that built into more projects.
And I would say that echo what Doug has already said. I think through our transforming planning process, there are some new steps in our engagement with community, with institutions, with industry that will be taken with more rigor and followed with more rigor in the future, because we see the advantages of that. I think that there is a high expectation for, particularly community expectation from our councillors and from our planning commission. So our feet are often held to the fire on the quality of our engagement. So we are trying very hard. Could it be better? Probably.
Well, how often have you heard someone say, well, why do you build neighborhoods that way? And the answer is, well, that's what the people want, right? Have you heard that? You know, we're just giving people what they want. I don't think that's true, and I don't think that the right questions are being asked. And with the exception of places like Seton that are definitely much more forward-looking, you know, we just see more of the same. And no one's ever asked me what I want. Has anyone ever asked you what you want? Have you had an opportunity to say that? So I think how we translate that into the true public engagement or true public opinion could be really transformative.
Doug wants to ask you.
Well, strangely, the other issue, of course, is intensification of existing neighborhoods. And we've had a number of projects blocked recently in total alignment with what the city wishes. It meets all the tick boxes of municipal development plan. But we have set up an engagement process here, which does give the edge up for groups that want to stop development, even if they meet all the city objectives. So it's a double-edged sword.
I would also add that it is a very difficult thing to achieve this complete level of engagement. And even though with most of our processes we have a high level of community involvement, often the members of the community that get involved are the ones that are particularly interested and always get involved. And inevitably, there are those in the community that didn't see the meeting notice or the 50 meeting notices and will come out after the fact and say, I never had any input, you never provided me with input. So we try very hard to avoid that, but it's difficult to engage the public on some of these planning and urban design issues. It's very difficult.
Maybe just you might be interested. You know that in downtown Montreal, they're building this gigantic hospital that is tearing down a whole neighborhood, and it's right downtown. And they have a whole division in that project to take into account and to build in the planning around this community development. So it's, when I first heard of it, we met with those people, I mean, they were actively engaging and seeking with community and the voices of the community. I mean, that's the inner city and homeless and all that stuff there.
I would say one more thing too, sorry Bev, is we're seeing some new processes evolve that are community-led. Those of you that are familiar with the Boda Bluff process, really grassroots, and those are the ones that we find are really effective. The ones that the community themselves, they devise the process and they run the process. So we'd love to see more of that happening. Sorry.
Bev?
Just to follow up there, and the whole NIMBY question gets involved in this issue, right? So public education is probably one of the more important things, because it's no sense having people engaged if all they're doing is protecting their individual interests. So to educate the public about the public good, the public realm, and how this is a city for all of us might just produce a slightly different result.
David?
Yes, I have a very narrow question for David, which has to do the outdoor lighting in the slide that you had looked like unshielded, non-dark sky compliant lighting. Are there standards for exterior lighting in Calgary?
There are certainly standards for exterior lighting. We have to be dark sky compliant. Any kind of broad-based lighting, parking lot lighting, et cetera, has to be full cutoff lighting, no light spill. There has been some discussion at council recently about how compliant we are. The experiential lighting, as we call it, is meant to be LED used in such a way that it doesn't cause kind of dark sky issues. So I think we will be careful with that, because there are a lot of people interested in both the dark sky issue and the avian fatality issue that I mentioned before, and how these can In fact, we're in most of these cases where these kinds of lighting are being used, the technology is so fantastic now. It's a much lower level of lighting, but it's achieving a much more even effect, and it's using a lot less energy. So we're really taking advantage of new technologies to get better effect.
Great. At this time, we'd like to open it up to the audience. So if anyone has a question, throw your hand up. Stand up, tell us what your question is. David, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I mentioned our transforming planning process. There's a lot of attention paid to what we call the explore phase, which is really meant to discuss ideas at very initial stages, either with an applicant or with the community. And I would agree, in the Bois de Bluff case, the outcome was excellent, but yes, the city might have been a little more involved in the beginning stages, although I think the city was a bit hands-off in that case because they didn't want to be the ones directing the process. So it's a difficult balance, and I think we'll learn from cases like that and work towards achieving that right balance. And every case is a little bit different, but certainly there is interest in exploring issues at a very early stage so they don't become bigger issues later.
I'd like to add to that. I'm with the City of Calgary and I manage the city's communications and public engagement program and policy at Calgary. One of the things that we've got this year, in fact, it's going to council, media council in the next 2 weeks, is an enhanced public engagement framework that they've requested. And one of the pieces is we're going to build on our website a portal that tracks all public engagement from all projects in the city so that you can see what other citizens are saying and all the diversity, so that when you have planning work on a project and they get some results from their engagement, and then 3 years later it goes over to transportation, they start doing work and they open up the engagement again, you can still see all the engagement that took place from previous departments. So it's trying to be more transparent, build more online tools, open up conversations for people that cannot come out to public open houses and have discussions. So we're trying to advance that program, and City Council is basically directing that public engagement is a priority for the city, and we're trying to continue to enhance the whole program. So
Thank you for that input.
And if I could add too that Doug mentioned the word alignment, and that is a huge corporate priority. And initiatives such as this help departments and business units remain aligned or become aligned and remain aligned throughout a project's process.
Doug?
I think the trend is to engage earlier at the vision stage before the drawings are done and they're pinned on the wall. Say, what do you think? So we've been experimenting as a company with a number of new techniques. We're going to try a few more. For example, with our co-landowners in the range use structure plan, we sponsored what we called the design co-opetition. We hands-off hired 3 firms, gave them a brief as to what the land might become, and let them draw their ideas. We then pinned those up over a weekend, unfortunately the biggest blizzard of the year, and asked people, which open space system do you think is the best of these? We didn't pick a winner. Which open space is the best, and which one do you think captures the spirit of this area best? So that's been carried forward to workshops with the city staff from all departments, and hopefully will be reflected in the structure plan and outline plans. So it wasn't a perfect process. We'll try not to schedule it during a snowstorm next year, but I would like to, we continue to try different ideas like that.
Great. We have time for one more question. You, stand. There's a microphone behind you too, if you want to.
Thank you. So just a quick question for the whole panel, and it's actually building on the question that was just asked. So earlier Dr. Potvin talked about the idea of people inventing local solutions and sort of drawing on locally available resources. So it's kind of taking the conversation about healthy communities a little bit broader than just built environment and urban design. But what do you guys see as being the role of community organizations and citizen groups in terms of developing those local solutions themselves and sort of empowering people to make that change locally and in collaboration with, with researchers and developers in the city? Just curious what your perspective is on that.
I want to start with you, Bev.
Well, Calgary's an interesting city in that I think the community associations are stronger here than anywhere I'm aware of, that people identify with their neighborhood first before their city. So that's something that's, I think, a tremendous asset. Things have changed too in the last 50 or 60 years, that it's no longer the so-called experts who are running the show, because we've seen sometimes that doesn't turn out all that well. So the more people can get a sense of belonging in their neighborhood and know what makes for a happier, healthier quality of life and way of life, the more they can get involved in those processes. But again, I think it comes down to public education. So when community associations have planning boards and so on that are bringing in people to talk to them, let them know more about the planning process and how to get involved and what the impacts are of different decisions, then I think public engagement and involvement by community associations can be a tremendously positive thing and develop a sense of place in a neighborhood that is wonderful.
Doug? Sorry.
After you, David.
This is a love-in.
I think the role of the community associations is incredibly important, but they do struggle. We do have successful community associations, but they do struggle, and they often come together around specific issues and then kind of drift apart when the issues are resolved or the issues go away. So the continuity of interest in these associations is often an issue, and the continuity of people that get involved in these associations. So there are some efforts that we're making to try to bring community associations around to more aligned positions. We have something called the Multi-Agency Task Force in Hillhurst Sunnyside, which is helping them with city and landowner expertise to deal with some particularly difficult issues there. But we also have something called the Partners in Planning program, which brings planners, transportation planners, heritage planners into individual communities periodically to talk about how they can have a role in the planning and urban design decisions in their community to inform, educate, and those courses are particularly directed at people that are involved in their community associations. So once or twice a year, those people will all come together and they'll talk about issues and City Hall processes and how to deal with issues. So we are hoping that strengthens the community association's understanding and helps them deal with some of these issues.
Final word, Doug?
I think one of the big challenges for Calgary as a fast-growing city is a sort of social connectivity and the loneliness that can happen with a lot of people moving into a new area or coming from another city. I think the community associations fulfill that role. It's still, I know it's not popular with a lot of people, but we speed that up in our areas with residents associations, which people pay into. We foster those over a long period of time. We arrange children's programs. That's often how people meet, social events, dancing, clubs, and so on. In our areas as well, we have a program called Karma Connect where we actually put in an internet system. So if you want to find a carpool partner or a babysitter or tennis player. So you may think it's artificial or social engineering, but I think that's an important part. And I don't know if that's the ideal solution, but I think we could be doing a lot more of that in Calgary. It's very important. And when we do our market research, it's one of the things that people tell us they really like.
Thank you very much. Join me in thanking Dr. Bev Sandilak, David Down, and Doug Layton.